So, as you know, Kamala has been on a tour lately with Liz Cheney. I mean, I want to know who the brain geniuses are in the Democratic consultant class who have advised Kamala Harris that her closing argument needs to be centered on Liz Cheney and maybe apparently Eminem, who's appearing with her tonight at a rally in Detroit, and Lizzo and people. But Liz Cheney is really the magic ingredient here. So let's. I want to play to you a clip of Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris yesterday in Wisconsin. So that's video 7. Let's hear that.
I tell people often, I spend a lot of time working on national security issues, and when people that I know in the Republican Party tell me they might be considering voting for Trump from a national security perspective, I ask them, go look at his national security policies. Please go look at them, because what he's proposing in terms of withdrawing from NATO, welcoming Vladimir Putin to attack our NATO allies, he praises Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, and President Xi of China, and Putin of Russia. And if you listen to him, he doesn't just praise those people generally. He praises them for their cruelty, for their tyranny. That's not who we are as a nation. It's not who we are. And the world needs us to be better, and our own security and our own freedom requires that we have a president who understands America has to lead, and that our strength comes both from our greatness and also from our goodness. And that's Vice President Harris.
And just to, thank you.
So there are so many ironies here. One of them is that Liz Cheney's entire critique of Trump, at least on a policy level, we know that she became obsessed with January 6th, and that was the breaking point. But insofar as she levels a foreign policy critique of Trump, she exists in some alternate universe where Trump wants to demolish NATO, withdraw from NATO. This was the same argument that was hysterically made in 2016 by the same sorts of anti-Trump Republicans, the David Frum types, Bill Kristol, et cetera, that because Trump made a wisecrack here or there, that meant he was going to upend the entire NATO alliance and maybe even collapse the whole rules-based international order. Now, in 2016, everybody had to engage in some degree of speculation about what Trump would do. He had no record. But now we all have the merciful advantage of 4 years worth of data to evaluate of what Trump did when he actually wielded power. I can't believe that we still seem like we're mired in like a 2016 time warp, as though like nothing's transpired in the past 8 years that could maybe shed some light on these issues. But Liz Cheney repeats this fiction that Trump is pledging to withdraw from NATO when Trump actually cites the support that he's gotten from the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, or the former Secretary General. Trump expanded NATO twice. He expanded NATO into Ukraine by elevating Ukraine into a subsidiary NATO status, right below full membership. He increased the funding instrument, the Pentagon funding instrument for U.S. force deployments in Eastern Europe beyond anything Obama ever did. He armed Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. But Liz Cheney exists in this bizarro world where she has to feed into these elite liberal preoccupations around Trump, I guess as a vengeance for January 6th, which she seems to believe is one of the most significant events in all of human history. And Kamala Harris is fully on board with this critique. She's the only thing that Kamala Harris was able to muster recently when asked what she would do differently from Biden is put a Republican in her administration. Could that be Liz Cheney herself? Seems perfectly plausible, maybe as Secretary of State or something. So, yeah, I mean, whose bright idea was this, and who does this appeal to?
I don't know what's going to happen in the election. If Trump is victorious, I'm very interested to see the postmortem, tell-all stuff leaked to Politico. It seems to happen every election. After Clinton lost in 2016, you had all those great leaks, again, to Politico, showing that This is, I'm sure, from one of her consultants or someone high up, because it had very detailed information. But in the waning days of the election, the week before the election in 2016, that she diverted funding and support from the Midwest, from places like Wisconsin, from the blue wall states, to Louisiana and California. Why? Because she had no hope of winning Louisiana. She already, of course, would win California. It's a gigantic Democratic state. But she was actually concerned of the opposite outcome. She thought that she might win the Electoral College, but then lose the popular vote. So she wanted to generate additional Democratic votes in areas where there was no kind of competition from Trump, no serious competition. She just wanted a higher raw vote total, and indeed she got that. But then she lost the Electoral College by refusing to campaign in some of those blue wall states, and of course diverting vital election resources. And so I think we're going to get a similar postmortem in case Kamala loses this very pivotal last month of the election. We seem to be seeing Dick and Liz Cheney every day on the campaign trail or in campaign ads for the Kamala campaign. I mean, this seems like a transparent ploy to the kind of MSNBC style suburban voter who, is concerned about Russia, sees Putin as the America's, worst adversary, really kind of got into the Russiagate stories from the Trump administration. And this is kind of a quick emotional pull for them to see these kind of arguments, even though they don't really make sense. And yeah, I don't even know how sincere they are from Liz Cheney. I don't know if you saw this, but just the other day, she was asked about Roe v. Wade. Liz Cheney has been a anti-abortion politician her entire career. Suddenly she's singing a different tune and said that Donald Trump went too far in reversing that decision. It's like, well, he's just a regular Democrat now, except with the Cheney foreign policy viewpoint and legacy.
It's very similar to all the Never Trump people, like the Bulwark and the Dispatch, which I can't even differentiate between, frankly. But media organizations like that, they initially claimed that they were just anti-Trump, but they were anti-Trump because they were so adamant about retaining their true conservatism. But then they get embraced by like the MSNBC Atlantic kind of firmament, and then have a wholesale epiphany as to their entire political philosophy and become effectively just partisan Democrats. But another irony here that I did want to ask you about is, so what are the actual policy differences between Liz Cheney and Trump? Because when Liz Cheney, on foreign policy in particular, because now Liz Cheney is claiming that they have these mammoth differences between them, and Trump has replied in kind. But when Liz Cheney was actually in Congress, and she was chair of the Republican House Conference, she was almost unwaveringly supportive of virtually everything that Trump did in the foreign policy domain. So bring up the screenshot that is memory hold of Liz Cheney reacting to the Soleimani assassination. This is graphic 245. I mean, this is lost in the ether, I guess. It falls to people like me who have annoyingly long memories. But this is her praising the drone strike assassination of Soleimani and saying that Trump was right to order it. Other people, for example, Tulsi Gabbard, I happen to know, were extremely opposed to the Soleimani assassination, claiming that it was done on false pretenses. Now she's apparently another Republican surrogate, so I don't even know how to begin to approach that one. But what are the substantive differences between Liz Cheney and Donald Trump, other than Liz Cheney got unduly fixated on January 6th and thought that democracy was on the line, and now she has to recast everything as though she was always in this diehard opposition to Trump? It doesn't really make much sense. And one more quick point. The one difference that Liz Cheney and Trump did have on a substantive policy level was around Afghanistan. Liz Cheney tried to get an amendment. She did get an amendment added to the NDAA in 2020. Glenn covered this at the time, to impede Trump's ability to withdraw from Afghanistan. It didn't fully impede it, but it just put up obstacles, right? But now Trump is saying that he was never going to withdraw from Afghanistan at all. In fact, he was going to keep a permanent occupying force of at least 4,000 troops at Bagram Air Base, maintain it in perpetuity, supposedly to have a way to project force against China. But he was going to actually do away with the Doha Agreement that he and Mike Pompeo brokered with the Taliban in 2020, which provided for the full withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan, including from all bases. Trump said he was never going to follow through on that. And now he's not just condemning Biden for withdrawing from Afghanistan because it was done incompetently. He's condemning the very principle of withdrawing from Afghanistan. So I guess, like, if you get so lost in the partisan kind of rhetoric here and the kind of the peculiar circumstances of where we find ourselves today, you kind of lose sight of the policy continuity between Liz Cheney and Trump that neither of them really want to acknowledge at the moment. And Kamala apparently is all on board with this policy continuity.
Yeah, well, you look at terms that people use, used to be the deep state, but now that's been so politicized. But the blob, that there is this kind of foreign policy uniparty in DC, and the differences between left and right are mostly tonal, and perhaps the neocons are more aggressive, and the Democrats are a little bit more subdued, but their general outlook in terms of American empire and intervention is pretty close together. The Democrats and Republicans in this presidential election keep coming closer and closer together, and to a point where they're just competing to be more and more of the same. I mean, the fact that Kamala has not outlined what her worldview is, that she even wants to end Israel's military escalation in Lebanon, or to hold them back from a strike from Iran, or to make peace in Gaza, to have some kind of resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict. She's only kind of vaguely supported a ceasefire, but without any kind of teeth or any kind of any deterrent for Israel to keep behaving in the way that it is, and said really nothing about ending or winding down the conflict in Ukraine. How is she even different from Trump in this regard? It's really just tonal. It's rhetorical. And you look at where she's drawing her foreign policy advice. It's places like CNAS, Center for New American Security, which is a think tank that, it's not neocon, it's not as aggressive, but in terms of its policies, it's not terribly different from the Hudson Institute and those on the right. And you look at her chief foreign policy advisor, Phil Gordon, who supported the Libya intervention, who's been very hawkish on China. You look at his actual policy positions, they're perhaps not as extreme as the Cheneys, but are they even that different, right? In terms of maintaining this kind of global American empire, of antagonizing America's adversaries. I know that the politics and the media coverage of this are completely poisoned because we don't have institutional memory, and the media has just lied to us for 20 years about the actual occupation of Afghanistan and how bad it truly was. So people think that any kind of withdrawal is some type of surrender, but that's the kind of one bright spot in the Biden administration the last 4 years in terms of foreign policy, in my view. And she hasn't rushed to defend that either. She kind of under her breath has defended it. So look, it's just very disappointing. And so when people glom on Liz Cheney's views to her own, it's filling a void where people just have to guess. And it's maybe a very rightful guess because she hasn't articulated. She does have that same kind of architecture of advisors who have advocated for more wars and more intervention. So why assume that she's any different from her surrogates?
Yeah, so last point, I promise, but I did prepare this because I wanted to show it to you if you hadn't seen it. But like, you did raise the point today of, given that Kamala is going around campaigning with Liz Cheney and saying how much they agree with one another and are of two minds on all these massively important issues, what inference can one make other than that they have a similar worldview, or at least a compatible enough worldview that they can be like governing partners, right? And I put this very question to Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, at the first presidential debate last month. I asked her, do Kamala Harris and Dick Cheney, what do they disagree on? I mean, all Kamala Harris does is tout how much they are in simpatico with one another. So let's play that brief clip, video 4 of myself, with
Senator
Chris Murphy.
Tonight, Kamala Harris touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney.
She did.
Did you find that at all bizarre? Would you welcome the endorsement of Dick Cheney? Am I the only one who remembers that he was integral in launching the Iraq War on false pretenses? Is that all been memory hold now?
Well, she's trying to win an election, right? And in winning an election, you're trying to build a coalition that's as big as possible. So it is important that there are a whole bunch of Republicans, many of them who worked very closely with Donald Trump, who have who having seen him up close, are convinced that he is deeply unqualified to do the job. So I do think it's important that there are a host of people who disagree with Kamala Harris on policy, but are supporting her because they believe that the election of Donald Trump would mean the destruction of our democracy. It just, I think, solidifies the stakes of the election.
But do Dick Cheney and Kamala Harris really disagree substantively? They seem to have fairly compatible foreign policy worldviews from everything I heard from Kamala tonight.
Yeah, I think they disagree significantly.
On what?
Seriously. On what?
Yeah, what do they disagree on?
I mean, did Kamala Harris support the Iraq War that Dick Cheney started?
She wasn't in public office at the time. She may well have.
Does she support giving unfettered subsidy to the oil and gas industry? So you asked me for some examples. I gave you some.
So, I mean, I thought that was a pretty...
That was very good, by the way. But, on that second point, the Biden administration, in a deal with Joe Manchin, added lots of fossil fuel subsidies to get their clean energy agenda passed. So, we have lots of money to, this carbon capture sequestration technology, lots of money to other kind of fossil fuel friendly priorities as part of the wider kind of Inflation Reduction Act package. So I don't know, that I feel like that was just kind of a silly point as he walked away. I mean, there's plenty of fossil fuel subsidies from the Biden administration.
Yeah, and then again, to complete this point, let's play the clip of Kamala Harris at that very debate. This is what prompted me to ask him this question, because it wasn't just that Kamala Harris had cited the endorsement of Dick Cheney and touted it as the endorsement that she was most proud of and wanted to put before the American public, but that she was resurrecting Bush-Cheney era rhetoric, specifically with respect to Afghanistan. So this is video 3.
But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States.
So, Lee, that's Kamala Harris denouncing the entire basis for the withdrawal from Afghanistan by castigating Trump for negotiating with terrorists, thereby resurrecting the classic Bush-Cheney refrain about how the United States will never negotiate with terrorists, and denouncing Trump for sullying the honor of Camp David by even contemplating bringing the Taliban there to broker some sort of arrangement to facilitate a withdrawal. And she cites, without naming him, John Bolton, who, after he left the Trump administration, denounced the deal. So again, my point to Chris Murphy wasn't just to point out that Kamala Harris had brought up Dick Cheney, but that there's every reason to think that they have, along with Liz, compatible worldviews until she indicates something to the contrary.
there's this Faustian bargain that's being made by the Democrats really ever since Trump's election in 2016 that, oh God, here's someone who's calling for our NATO allies to increase their defense spending so we don't have to provide so much of the security resources for Europe. Here's someone who wants to talk to our enemies, talk to North Korea, talk to other countries like Russia. Here's someone who kind of defies the neoconservative blob. So here's our political opportunity. Let's seize the neocons and absorb them into the left. And, there's perhaps a short-term political victory that could be had with showing, bipartisan credentials, but I think it could spell something very ugly and dark for the future of the Democratic Party by moving so sharply down this path. I mean, it's logically incoherent, especially when she's condemning essentially the Biden administration for negotiating with terrorists for its own pullout of Afghanistan. It's this kind of war escalation and boogeyman style rhetoric, this one-dimensional thinking that makes peace impossible. Once you label your political and foreign adversaries as terrorists you can never speak to, then functionally any kind of peace negotiation is impossible. And this type of rhetoric, once you kind of apply so broadly, it takes on a life of its own where it has no meaning, right? Like Itamar Ben-Gvir, the current security minister for Israel, not long ago was associated with a terrorist group. He had Baruch Goldstein, the terrorist who shot 50 people in a mosque in Hebron, a poster of him in his own apartment in the West Bank. He was a devoted follower of this kind of terrorist ideology in Israel. Things changed, and now Ben-Gvir is part of the Netanyahu government. Does that mean the U.S. government should never negotiate with Ben-Gvir? Right? Like it doesn't really make sense. It's really just rhetoric designed to snuff out any kind of dialogue, to prevent the ability for foreign dignitaries to ever meet and discuss things. And it kind of creates this Manichaean worldview of black and white thinking of you're either with us or against us, that again is really reflective of the Bush administration. I think you're completely right about that.
All right. Well, Lee, on that happy note, thanks for reassuring me about the state of U.S. politics and media and giving me so much to be optimistic about.
Absolutely.
Remind everyone where they can look up your work if you'd like.
Primarily on Substack, LeeFang, FANG.com. Find myself there.
Yep. And I'm mtracy.net. So now that we've hawked our URLs, Lee, it's always good to chat.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.